Okay, good morning. It's 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Cara Woods Serra. I'm with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and I want to welcome you to the Comprehensive Planning for Clean Water webinar, Tools and Strategies. This webinar is being hosted by the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. The webinar will also feature speakers from Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission and the Hillsborough County government. Also, there are 1.5 CM credits available thanks to a partnership with the Florida Suncoast section of the APA. So first, I wanted to introduce you to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and our work. We serve the 6-county region shown on this map here, which goes from Citrus County in the north to Manatee County in the south. Our member governments also include 21 municipalities, and we support member governments by providing them opportunities for cross-jurisdiction collaboration and technical assistance, specifically in areas like emergency management, urban design. We're also doing a lot of stuff in resiliency projects and programs right now. And our co-host, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's mission is to build partnerships to restore and protect the Tampa Bay estuary through implementation of a scientifically sound community-based management plan. Their service area includes the 2,200 square miles shown on the map here, and that is the Tampa Bay watershed. It includes Pasco, Pinellas, Polk, Hillsborough, and Manatee counties. I now want to introduce you to our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Maya Burke with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And she is a science policy coordinator with the TBEP, and she manages projects and programs that implement the scientifically sound community-based comprehensive conservation and management plan. And she'll be giving us some background on TBEP as an organization and as the comprehensive conservation and management plan. So we have that baseline for the discussions ahead. Next, we'll have Melissa Dickens from the Hillsborough County Planning Commission alongside Kevin Moran from Hillsborough County. And they'll be joining us to discuss their One Water program. And finally, I will be talking about the partnership with TBEP to create a crosswalk for the CCMP, along with model language to help planners to integrate the estuary programs at priority actions. So I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to hear a brief history of the national estuary programs and some of the barriers to implementing those programs, especially at the local government level. Then we're going to hear from Hillsborough County about the Hillsborough County One Water program and how that works with a multi-jurisdictional, planning team. Focuses on working with planners and engineers and natural resource managers, and how that collaborative team can be used to incorporate the type of estuary program goals that we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to talk about the partnership with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, where we did a crosswalk of some of the local jurisdictions' comprehensive plans against the actions of the comprehensive, the CCMP, and the outcome of that, which was the model language development. So I'm going to turn things over to Maya Burke with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to give us a bit of background on TBEP and the CCMP.
Good morning, I'm Maya Burke, the Science Policy Coordinator for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Today, I'll give you all a bit of historical context for the EPA's National Estuary Program and describe how these place-based efforts coordinate the implementation of a broad spectrum of local protection and restoration activities between a variety of partners. I'll also summarize some of the recently developed technical assistance products available to local governments that are interested in aligning their comprehensive planning processes for the benefit of cleaner water and sound estuary management. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, the EPA's National Estuary Program is a non-regulatory program that was established by Congress and authorized by Section 320 of the Clean Water Act in 1987. Through this program, 28 estuaries along our coast have been designated as estuaries of national significance, and their partners are working to improve both water quality and address challenges to living resources. Although our NEPs exist in a variety of different organizational settings, they all convene diverse stakeholders and apply a collaborative, consensus-based approach to adaptively manage resources within their respective watersheds. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program is an independent special district of the state of Florida, a formal intergovernmental partnership that's made of representatives from local, regional, state, and federal agencies. Our work to protect, restore, and manage Tampa Bay is guided by a document called a Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, or CCMP for short. Our CCMP was developed with thorough input from the community, including average citizens, technical experts, private industry, and our many, many partners. It's intended as a science-based community blueprint for action to sustain our progress toward bay recovery over a 10-year planning horizon. The CCMP details 39 actions and hundreds of associated activities spanning from topics from water quality and sediment quality to fish, wildlife, and habitats, to dredging and spill prevention, climate change, to public access and involvement. And as a staff of 7, we simply cannot accomplish all of these things on our own. Our work has always relied upon the commitment and dedication of our partners, particularly those of you serving in local governments. Especially in urbanized watersheds like our own, our planners and natural resource managers must work together to promote development practices that protect water quality, habitats, and quality of life for our coastal communities. Therefore, the regulatory and institutional context for how environmental protection activities are coordinated through a patchwork of local, state, and federal laws has shaped our work here in Tampa Bay. This timeline illustrates some of the landmark environmental legislation put into place at the state and national level in the early 1970s, setting the stage for much of the progress that we see and enjoy today. Then the shift to emphasize more regional governance for both environmental and growth management in the 1980s, to when our program was founded and our first CCMP approved in the 1990s. At that time, there was a state coordinated review process that included input from many external agencies who provided de facto technical assistance to the benefit of local governments, especially for our smaller communities. We operated this way through our next CCMP revision with the review processes that formalized intergovernmental collaboration and invited expertise from a variety of different disciplines, all serving as a resource for local government planners and environmental managers. But the old way certainly was not perfect, and it did cause a number of headaches. And as many of you are likely aware, the state legislature began modifying our growth management laws in the mid to late 2000s, perhaps most notably with the passage of the Community Planning Act in 2011. The Community Planning Act was heralded as a return to local control and narrowly prescribed the role of reviewing agencies and limiting the oversight of the state. So nearly 10 years later, we now have some valuable perspective on the broader implications of this most recent approach to growth management. As we began to update our CCMP in 2017, one thing we heard loud and clear from our partners was the need to provide clear guidance and support for the local implementation of activities assigned to them in the CCMP. Our partners wanted to be sure that their individual efforts were compatible with, not canceled out by neighboring communities. Resource managers expressed specific challenges they faced when collaborating with their colleagues in planning and legal departments to ensure that the regional commitments made by their elected officials were legally defensible and appropriately adopted into comprehensive plans. They acknowledged that some of these struggles are people-based, and they wanted help to build and sustain relationships for knowledge sharing, especially given turnover that they were experiencing and a coming wave of workforce successions. And finally, absence from the formal process of state coordinated review, our partners asked for help in establishing new workflows and technical assistance resources to ensure that they have flexible and responsive decision support systems necessary for their individual and collective success. So naturally, we added a new local implementation action plan to our CCMP. That original ask from our partners, incorporated as a new action into the current version of our CCMP, is the impetus for today's workshop. The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council has been working hard to develop assessment tools and model language to help local governments achieve the goals of the CCMP. While the tools developed by the Regional Planning Council focus on several specific priority actions from the CCMP, we'll also be sharing one local example of what this work looks like in practice, particularly related to concepts identified in the Water and Sediment Quality Action Plan to encourage the use of green infrastructure to treat and manage stormwater runoff, and to expand the beneficial use of reclaimed water, particularly for ecosystem benefits. Melissa Dickens and Kevin Moran will provide an overview of Hillsborough County's One Water Plan Amendment, which is a novel and exemplary approach to water resource management, which is consistent with the principles and activities that are identified in our most recent CCMP update. They're also walking the talk when it comes to collaborating internally, creating pathways for information sharing from their regional estuary program representatives and throughout their own organization. And they're also including input from external stakeholders such as the Water Management District, Regional Water Supply Authority, and others. We hope that by sharing this work with you today, you're inspired to build relationships both within and beyond the confines of your own organizations and ensure that the policies you craft contribute toward a healthy Tampa Bay.
Thank you again, Maya, for that really wonderful introduction. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. The One Water chapter or update to the comprehensive plan is something that both the planners and the technical experts in Hillsborough County have been working on for quite some time now. We're excited about the plan, but also excited about the process and the collaborative way in which the plan was developed. We think it's something that can be easily implemented by other local governments, either in Florida or elsewhere around the country. My name is Melissa Dickens, and I am the Strategic Planning and Policy Manager with the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. Our agency conducts the long-range planning for all 4 local governments in Hillsborough County. And Hillsborough County, the unincorporated county, is the largest local government we serve, both in geographic area and also in population. And we worked with Kevin's group in the Environmental Management Division, as well as other water resource professionals, to put together this One Water Plan update.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Moran. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Florida and I'm the division director for the Environmental Management Division for Hillsborough County. Hillsborough County is a large municipal government. It's 36 square miles, and it's almost a perfect square, but out of that 36 square miles, 20% is actually Tampa Bay. And in the county, there are 1.47 million people. We also have a significant agricultural business with receipts of over $700 million. And we also have phosphate mining in the county. All of these different activities have a significant demand on water. And because of that, the county has to plan for water use. And my group has a leading role in that with the Planning Commission. Water is critical to the economy, health, and quality of life for Hillsborough County. My team works to protect it through regulatory actions as well as an environmental laboratory. We also have a responsibility for resiliency planning in the county.
And so I'm going to share a little bit of background about the current adopted comprehensive plan and the basis from which we started. So similar to many other local governments within the state of Florida, the comprehensive plan in Hillsborough County has not been updated in quite some time. The last time it went through a major update was back in 2008. And much of the language within the water resources elements can be considered even older than that. Some of it was drafted back in the 1990s. It follows the classic Florida separated and siloed elements model with a distinct stormwater management, sanitary sewerage, and potable water element. And then there are other water resources related language and maps that are found throughout the comprehensive plan and other elements. There's a really good basis, but the plan does not have an overarching theme related to water. The plan does not necessarily link to how the technical experts such as Kevin's group implement projects. And because it's been so long since it's been updated, it doesn't necessarily link well to today's county priorities. So although there are over 200 goals, objectives, and policies related to water within the plan, we recognized a need to take a closer look at it and see if there was a way we could better integrate it.
So in terms of the county's technical staff and issues with, and the demonstrate the need for one water, I have a couple different, what's typically called siloed examples. The first I can think of is when I first started with the county, I was a utility planner doing only wastewater planning, and we developed our own population projections, and 3 cubicles down was another gentleman doing potable water planning, and he was actually doing population projections for himself. So clearly, you know, we were so compartmentalized, the potable water and wastewater groups weren't even working together. At the same time, there was an effort by our reclaim folks and people in the stormwater group to develop a regional stormwater system that would contribute to the reclaimed water system. The impediment, the cultural impediment there was senior staff wasn't able to budget a project across departments. We also had problems even working staff-wise. We were in different locations, didn't know each other well, and didn't understand each other's priorities. But with our most recent board of county commissioners, they've pushed harder for sustainability and resilience to be involved with everything we do. And we realized integrated water resource management concepts would help with that, and they really were the precursors to the One Water approach. So One Water, the easiest way to illustrate the concept of One Water is to go back to elementary school and think of the water cycle that we all learned. Rain falls down, goes into the earth, comes out in the ocean, evaporates, goes back. And there's a equivalent to this in the built environment, and that is the man's influence on this as we interrupt these sets of these systems to capture water for irrigation and for drinking and for commercial use, and then we put it back in, and all of those things were done independent of one another and not thought of as a system, and that's what we're trying to do with One Water now.
And so the interrelationships of water and the interrelated nature of water is what set the basis for the approach that we took with the comprehensive plan update and One Water. And what we found when we were looking and looking for other examples is that while there are various communities, mostly some of the major cities that are doing One Water plans, we didn't find very many examples of a comprehensive plan that took a One Water approach. So we felt like this was an opportunity for us to be really innovative, to be really novel, and look at our comprehensive plan in a different way. And so we had some pretty ambitious goals for this project. Of course, we wanted it to reflect the interrelated nature that Kevin spoke about. We also wanted to make sure that we were incorporating the feedback and direction from our Board of County Commissioners. We had a series of workshops regarding sustainable land use, sustainable planning, and there were concepts related to water contained in those that we wanted to include. We wanted to make sure that the plan provided a framework for county initiatives, for things that county staff were pursuing. Of course, wanted to utilize best practices and sound science and sound water resources management in the plan, making sure that we were coordinating water resources planning with other aspects of planning in the county. So we didn't want to be doing water resources planning in a vacuum and ignoring the relationships between land use planning, between corridor planning, between other aspects that relate. We also wanted to take a look at the plan, and this is full candor. There were a number of duplication and redundancies and inconsistencies throughout the plan, so we wanted to make sure that we eliminated those. And then most importantly, and I can't underscore this enough, we wanted the plan to be an implementable document. So we did not want this to be a plan that would be adopted and then sit on a shelf and collect dust or look pretty on a shelf. We wanted it to be something that our technical experts, our technical partners, the folks on the ground could actually implement, use, rely upon, use as a resource. And so that was incredibly important to us. And so pretty early on, both the planners and the water resources professionals who were working on this project realized that there needed to be a greater deal of collaboration in developing the language.
So along with that concept of don't let it be a shelf plan, the senior staff above me kept saying, you have a plan, but what's it really look like on the ground? And we finally built a table for senior staff to show them how particular elements of the One Water approach could lead to either regulations or capital projects. Some of the One Water policies talk about making sure people understand the importance of water conservation or the importance of stormwater systems. So that leads to education and outreach. And then finally, a significant amount of the One Water element is about conservation of the natural resource. And that leads to programmatic elements like our ELAP program. Now, a lot of this existed. And so we're not going to, say, hey, the One Water element of our comprehensive plan created ELAP. We just want to make sure that ELAP is supported by the comprehensive plan, and it may lead to even a strengthening of ELAP as we move forward.
And so we took a collaborative approach to drafting the comprehensive plan language. The core group involved in drafting that language was the One Water, what we call the One Water Working Group. And that contained staff from both our agency, the Planning Commission, as well as staff from a number of different water resource disciplines across Hillsborough County. Essentially, if there was a department or a division that worked with water in some way, we had a representative from that group as part of the working group. We had a pretty aggressive schedule, so we did meet every other week, looking at the existing language, examining best practices and examples, and working to draft that One Water chapter. We also made sure to have regular check-ins with our senior leadership team, of course, getting their buy-in and input up front, but also along the way, checking in with them to make sure that we were on the right course, to make sure that what we were drafting was consistent with what they were hearing from the elected officials and from the community and from stakeholders. So we met with them regularly to get their guidance. We also met with some of the state and local agencies to get their input ahead of when the draft was made available for public comment. We, because this was a novel approach to comprehensive planning and really an innovative new way of looking at it, we wanted to make sure that we had the buy-in of folks like like Tampa Bay Water, which is our regional water supply authority here, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and then for the Florida planners on the call, I cannot underscore enough the importance of getting the buy-in of the Department of Economic Opportunity, the folks who review these plans for consistency with the statutory requirements, and so we also vetted it with them ahead of time as well. And now we're in what is probably the most important phase, the public and stakeholder outreach phase. We are hearing from members of the public, members of the community, stakeholder groups, and getting their feedback, getting their input, and we'll be making some tweaks to the final product based upon what we're hearing from the community. And then we also had a number of considerations or a number of things that we had to consider when we were looking at crafting this language. And the first thing was, what should we keep? I mean, we have 200 or so policy directives. There's a lot of good stuff there. So we wanted to make sure that we were retaining the important components that provided important direction for us. And then we looked at, okay, what's not in there? So what are some best practices? What's the current, what is the current planning and water resources communities say should be included? What are some new initiatives that the community and the BOCC wants us to make sure that we touch on? So we took a look at that too and found a way to include that information. And then we also wanted to make sure that the comprehensive plan could serve as a backing or a framework for various county initiatives and programs. And there were a couple of things that really are sort of philosophical discussions. We had this discussion or these discussions a number of times within our working group, but one of those is, when does a programmatic objective or a programmatic direction rise to the level of being policy and being included in the comprehensive plan? And then another philosophical discussion is, what is the right level of language? Is it very broad policy direction, or is it much more specific? Are there specific aspects of the comprehensive plan that we need to make sure we're clear on, because those are important to the community and to stakeholders? And then finally, an important consideration was, how do we make sure that the comprehensive plan and the One Water chapter are setting the appropriate expectations? Of course, there are competing priorities, limited financial resources, and we wanted to make sure that the language was not creating either an unfunded mandate or an unstaffed mandate and making it difficult for the people who actually have to do the implementation.
So as Melissa alluded to in the previous slide, the technical folks, we would be given, in the old days anyway, we were given like our element of the comprehensive plan. At the time I got sewerage, and didn't really understand how that element fit into the overall comprehensive plan, and was certainly guilty of writing a bunch of rules and regulations that we already followed into the plan, into that element of the plan, not understanding that the plan should only be overarching policies. For example, we would write things like, we won't have sewer spills, or things that we are required to do through regulatory framework already, that wasn't really adding a new or important policy concerning wastewater specific to Hillsborough County. And now, more important, just as important, is understanding wastewater in terms of the water cycle. So those two, to break down the silos and to understand that the comprehensive plan document is a policy document, not a rules and regulations document, were two of the most important things that came out of this exercise we did for the technical group.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits from a planner perspective that I saw from this collaboration with the technical folks. So first, a main benefit that is not necessarily directly related to this project, but really I think is overarching in everything we do as planners, is the fact that this sort of process strengthens relationships. It strengthens communication with the technical experts, working closely with them. It provides a really great professional relationship that then will go on to be important for other projects, for other initiatives. And so setting that relationship foundation was one major benefit. And then specifically related to this project, one important benefit of collaboration is we learned early on what would work or what wouldn't, what was implementable, what wasn't. And so we were able to know up front whether or not something was, a great idea that I saw another community do, but it would not work given the context and the constraints of Hillsborough County. And so that the collaboration in the meetings took quite a bit of time in the short term, but ultimately in the long term, it resulted in a better product. It resulted in a product that we knew would work and could be implemented.
Yeah, we were very pleased. I think that it helped us, for example, when we comment now, because my group's always had a responsibility for commenting on the comprehensive plan amendments. We have a much better understanding of what our comments need to be, and a much more respect for the process. And that's been good as well. Melissa also mentioned the unstaffed mandate, which is a funny way to say it, but we realized that the comprehensive plan had requirements in it that were not technically necessary as we moved along too. There were things where they asked for an annual review of something where the situation didn't just change that quickly. Certainly a neighborhood and their need for water or wastewater doesn't, if we recognize the need in year one, there's no reason to go back in year two and say, yeah, they still need water or wastewater if we don't have the funding to do it. So I think that we were able to make the comprehensive plan a much better document that without adding a lot of workload to people that had been there in the past. Not that it's not necessary work, but there just was nothing new coming out of some of those reviews and analyses requested in the original comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and one other lesson learned for me and recommendations for other planners who might be pursuing something similar is to really try to understand and get to know some of the pressures and schedules and constraints of the technical experts. So as planners, of course, we're very focused on the plan, the long range vision, but when you have a large group of people who have other extremely high priority competing demands, it's important to try to structure the work to be responsive to that, to be sensitive to their schedules and the nature of their work. So this fortunately did not happen during this process, but if, for example, there was a significant rain event in Hillsborough County and the stormwater folks had to be out in the field for a couple of weeks, responding to it or working on it, then that's something that, we need to understand and be sensitive to, because the nature of work of the technical professionals that we collaborate with is very different than the nature of the work that the planners do. So I think whatever planners can do to do the heavy lifting, to try to be respectful and responsive to the technical experts' schedule, I think those are some things that I learned along the way, and I think are really important when it comes to working with people who are responsible for the drinking water, responsible for the wastewater, and responsible for the stormwater in the community. And so real quickly, we did want to touch a little bit on the end result, which is the One Water chapter. This chapter is serving as the initial portion of our overall comprehensive plan update. So we are updating the comprehensive plan in phases, and this is going to be the first phase moving forward. We are completely combining the previously separated stormwater management, sanitary sewerage, and potable water elements. We're also bringing together or including water resources related language and maps from other elements within the comprehensive plan. And we also have created and updated the language to have it be tailored to the current context and county priorities. What is important today? What are the major initiatives we need to be looking at in 2020? I'll also say that the revised draft is much leaner. It really has shrunk down quite a bit from when the water resource language was scattered throughout the comprehensive plan, and it's really tightly tailored to what is important to us as a community now. And then finally, because of this process, because of this approach, we know that it can be vetted and is implementable by county staff. And then ultimately, we had 6 goals for the One Water chapter. I won't read them, you can see them up there on your screen, but it represents the broad way in which we looked at water, the broad approach we took. And then within those 6 goals, we have more specific objectives that relate to things like green infrastructure and coordinated capital projects and concepts such as those. But those One Water goals, those 6 goals are what we arrived at a result of this project. And then finally, I wanted to share some resources. If you all have your cell phones handy, perhaps a photo of this list would be helpful for future work. So our One Water chapter is available at planhillsborough.org/onewater. I won't read out all of these, but did want to give a shout out to the American Planning Association's Water and Planning Network. That's something that I'm a member of, and it's been invaluable in terms of getting information from other practicing planners who work in water in other parts of the country. So if you are a member of APA, I would encourage you to join the Water and Planning Network. And then the other documents that are there on the screen are some other resources that we used. If you have trouble finding those, I know Kevin mentioned that the blueprint for One Water was no longer available online, but if you want to email me directly, I have PDFs of all of these, so I can provide those to you as well. But would recommend looking at what other communities are doing, what's out there, and using those to work on your own One Water project or comprehensive water resources planning project. And then for the next portion of the presentation, we're going to turn it back to Cara, and I think her presentation really ties in nicely with the One Water work that we did, because it's an opportunity to implement similar approaches for other local government comprehensive plans, and they have some great model language available, technical assistance and examples that that communities can choose from and have the ability to tailor to their individual local government context and individual community. So it's a great way to work on water resources planning and know that it is backed by best practices and sound scientific information.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, I'm just making sure I've got everything all queued up. And yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some of the things in Melissa's slides. I know she put a bunch of resources there, and I'm sure people are going to ask. We'll send out this presentation as a PDF, so people can have access to those resources. And again, the presentation is going to be recorded, so if you want to refer back to that recording, we'll also have that available on our website. But these on the screen are the two goals of the initial collaboration with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. And it was to make the CCMP goals and actions implementable in local government comprehensive plans by developing model language for local governments to use in long-range planning. And those were the initial goals. Throughout the process, we did learn a lot about how a multi-jurisdictional and multidisciplinary staff team, such as the one discussed in the One Water presentation that Melissa and Kevin just gave, would really complement the implementation of these model language policies and the recommendations coming from the CCMP. So in the first phase of the project, we took all of the action plan items from the CCMP and compared them to the comprehensive plans of these local governments on the screen: Pinellas County, Manatee County, Hillsborough County, Pasco, City of Clearwater, City of Tampa, and City of St. Petersburg. We compared the comprehensive plans of these local governments with the CCMP actions, which allowed us to establish a baseline understanding of what these comprehensive plans already said and whether or not they might already address the goals and priorities of the CCMP. So we used this mechanism to compare the CCMP to the existing comprehensive plans. We conducted a review about whether or not the CCMP actions were addressed in the local government comprehensive plans and to what degree. And it was really a presence-absence review, not necessarily this is good or bad. It's just it's there or it's not. So each of the CCMP action items was placed into a color category, with blue meaning that the action plan was specifically addressed within the comp plan. The green means it's generally addressed. The purple color is saying that it's vaguely referenced in the comprehensive plan. Red color is the activity is prohibited or prevented by conflicting code or state statute in the comprehensive plan or in other documents. And then if it has a brown on our scoring matrix, then the activity was not applicable for that specific government. So if that government was maybe not located on a specific waterway or didn't have rivers, and the action item was referencing rivers, then it would not be applicable to that local government. And then finally, the yellowish orange color would say that it's not addressed. We also have an X, which would be if the steering committee determined that it was not applicable. So here's one example of comparing the CCMP action item to the existing language in a comprehensive plan. So the action item is Water Quality 1, implement the Tampa Bay Nutrient Management Strategy. And you can see the text on the left is the specific language in the CCMP. And basically what our staff did was compare the language on the left to the language on the right. And essentially the more words that matched, the more closely we saw it fit with the action items. And again, it's not a, this is very good or this is very bad, it's just, it's a very close fit. So in this case, the Pinellas County Comprehensive Plan specifically addressed the Water Quality 1 action item. And that's because it had language that was very close to the language shown in the CCMP on the left. And this is another example, Bay Habitats 6. The language on the left is from the CCMP, and then the language from the right was from the St. Pete Comp Plan as it existed then. I will also point out that some of the comp plans have been updated since our matrix review. So some of them might more closely match or might have a different score today. So in this case, the St. Petersburg Comp Plan generally addressed Bay Habitat 6, which basically means it had a lot of, it had a good match to the language that was in the CCMP BH6. And so this is the crosswalk. You can see that all of the action items are on the left. The different jurisdictions are in the top right. The color categories are showing where the jurisdictions fall as far as whether or not they're specifically addressing the action items or more generally addressing them, or whether or not it's not applicable. So you can see wastewater or WW1 on the left. And then on the right, you can see the scores that the jurisdictions got. And in this case, this was one that was pretty well addressed across all jurisdictions. So as part of our process, we also asked the stakeholder jurisdictions to check our review. So if they went back and said, we don't actually agree with the way that it's scored in your initial crosswalk, we think it should be scored this way for this reason, we revise the crosswalk based on the stakeholder recommendations because they know their plan best. And really it is, you know, it's a human review. So we were just doing a word match. We could be missing something as far as where it's referenced in the plan. So we wanted our stakeholders to be able to review that process. And so that's essentially what was the phase 1 of this collaboration. So out of the phase 1, we had the actual matrix, as you see on the left. That's showing the sort of scores of the compatibility between the CCMP actions and the existing language in the comprehensive plan. And then we have, we also had another document where we looked through the Code of Ordinances and land development regulations for the jurisdiction to see if there was any anywhere in those documents where they might have addressed some of the CCMP action items that we didn't see in the comprehensive plans. So in phase 2, the stakeholder work group selected these 8 CCMP priority action plans for the development of model language. They selected 3 actions within the water sediment and quality goals, 4 actions in bay habitats, and 1 action in climate change. All 8 of these categories were already colored in the phase 1 matrix. And this is just another overview of those 3 priority action areas from which they selected the underlying actions. Stormwater 10, which was expanding the use of green practices and infrastructure. Bay Habitats 6, which encouraged habitat enhancement along altered waterfront properties. And Climate Change 1, which was improvability of bay habitats to adapt to a changing climate. So the stakeholders met in a meeting to facilitate a discussion about which of the priority actions could be most implementable at the local government level, and also which ones they most likely didn't have language already developed for. So from there, we narrowed it down to these 3 categories. The attendees at the meeting also provided feedback on the specific phrasing of the objective policy statements that we would develop when we develop comprehensive plan model language. They reviewed some of the examples of the model language we had found in other comprehensive plans and gave us some initial feedback. And then in the next step, or this is just kind of an overview, we went from the 8 priority actions to selecting the 3 that were most implementable and least likely to have existing model language. The stakeholders then told us that they wanted to refine those model language priorities down and actually develop model language for those 3. And then the comprehensive plans, we were told by our stakeholder group that they were moving in a direction to include more broad or general language to allow for flexibility in implementation. So we took that into consideration when we were developing the model language guidebook, and acknowledged that they might want to implement some things in other regulatory mechanisms as opposed to the comprehensive plan. So this is what we developed as far as the, this is sort of the template, I guess you could say, of the model language guidebook. So again, we developed model language for 3 of the priority actions, and this is one example from the Climate Change 1 priority action. So taking the stakeholder feedback into account that broad or general language was more favored, we did a mix and match sort of a methodology where if a jurisdiction wanted to use broad or general language, they could pick something from the left column. And if they wanted to use something that was more stringent or specific, they could pick something from the right column. So here we developed a goal that fit with the CC1 CCMP priority action. So the goal is the local government will support regional efforts to integrate climate change, stormwater management, and bay habitats into planning efforts in alignment with the applicable goals of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's comprehensive conservation and management plan. And we will put the resources on our webpage so that you can actually see all of the language, but this is just an example of how you would look at the language and think about whether or not you want the broad language or stringent and specific language. And Melissa had also talked about thinking about what level of language is best for the local jurisdiction. So our recommendation is not that the model language that we're showing on the previous screen or in our final report be adopted just outright. We are recommending that each jurisdiction looks at their sort of priorities and resources and think about whether or not broad language is more suitable to their needs or more stringent language. So in this example, this is Stormwater 10, which is one of the CCMP action items, which is to expand the use of green infrastructure practices. So in this example, if the jurisdiction found the expansion of green infrastructure practices to be a low priority or they had limited resources, they might put, the way they might implement it is through educational materials or requiring that local government projects have green infrastructure public projects. Whereas if it's a high priority or there are substantial resources in place to implement green infrastructure practices, the jurisdiction might provide incentives to developers to incorporate green infrastructure, or they might require land development regulations that implement green infrastructure. So below the arrow, you can see some examples of the language that might be adopted for this Stormwater 10. So on the left, it's very broad and general. You're encouraging green infrastructure practices or low impact development. And instead of saying specifically how that would be implemented, you're using the term such as, so it doesn't limit you to those things that are listed there. You could do more or less than what's listed there. Whereas on the right, we use the language require. So anything listed after that is going to be something that you'll have to implement through the land development regulations or like a stormwater technical manual or something along those lines. And then the example on the right also has a deadline. So it's more stringent in that it has basically a moratorium on anything prior to that. So the outcomes of that second phase were the development of the initial project goals, which were the crosswalk and the development of the model language, but also working with the stakeholder group, we found that jurisdictions needed flexibility in the model language that they were being given to make it more implementable. They had to think about whether or not they could actually implement it, whether there were the resources and basically the political will to implement anything that they might adopt. And then we also acknowledged that some of the actual implementation might occur in other documents, such as the land development regulations or in like a technical manual. Going forward, we're going to look at implementing some of these, or really making recommendations about some of these CCMP action plans in our regional action plan as well. So specifically, some of the shoreline hardening recommendations will be considered when we think about what we want regional ordinances to look like for green infrastructure, hardened shorelines, or living shorelines, and then especially the climate change adaptation for habitats in areas that are being affected by climate change. And so that ends the presentation portion of our webinar. Sarah, do you have any questions for the panelists?
Hi, so thank you, Maya, Melissa, Kevin, and Cara for these great presentations. We do have a few questions. Well, we received several questions about where we can access these materials after the webinar. We will be saving everything on our websites, both TBEP and the TBRPC. So following the webinar, we will send everyone an email with links to where you can access the webinar and download all these materials. That's the first few questions. We received a question for Melissa and Kevin about the process that you strategically developed to eliminate duplication, redundancy, and inconsistencies. And there was a question about what are some of the examples of duplication or redundancy that you saw in the plans?
Sure, so I can start. So one of the things that we did when we first started this whole project is we took all of the goals, objectives, and policies from our entire comprehensive plan. So we're talking like 2,200 or so goals, objectives, or policies. And we had an army of poor interns put them into a database. And through that database, we could search, we could compare, we could contrast. And so having that ability to put it into that type of format ahead of time really helped us and saved us a lot of work moving forward, because we were easily able to type in something like water conservation and see where we had policies in the potable water element, we had policies in the conservation aquifer recharge element, policies in the future land use element about conservation. So we did that up front as a holistic look at the whole comprehensive plan, because of course we are working on updating the entire comprehensive plan. And we also had the ability within that database to tag different policies by different subject matters. So we could tag, for example, within water related policies, those policies that related to capital projects and things like that. So we then had the ability to export from that database into Excel and take a look at what the language said, what it said in different elements. And that was a really great resource up front for trying to find any kind of duplication or redundancy or inconsistency. In terms of the types of duplication and redundancy that we saw, there was a lot, and I think that's probably a product of the comprehensive plan going through. In Florida, we have what used to be called the Department of Community Affairs, and they had, before the law changed in 2011, pretty strict requirements about what had to be in a plan, and oftentimes in order to meet those statutory requirements, the approach would be, well, let's add it in. Let's add something in here, let's add something in here. And of course, as with any large planning organization, you have different people working on different elements, and there's not necessarily an easy way to cross-reference. So now that we have this database, we're going to use it as we update the plan, and I think it'll be a helpful tool moving forward. But I mean, there was duplication, I mentioned the conservation example. There's also some duplication related to wellhead protection. We had wellhead protection language in several different elements. We had levels of service in both the CIE and the individual water related elements. So there was a number of repetitions found throughout the plan.
Great, thank you, Melissa. We had another question about the process for developing the CCMP crosswalk. There were several of the CCMP actions placed in the not applicable category. And we had a question about what were these 10 or so not applicable actions and why were they placed in that category. We have an attendee who's interested in using this model language to inform comp plans in other states. So they're curious what the process was for determining that these actions were not applicable.
So this is Maya Burke with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. The majority of the actions that the stakeholder committee identified as not applicable were pertaining to more of our scientific research initiatives for quantifying things like, fisheries independent monitoring programs or other kinds of sort of scientific research that's typically initiated by our state and regional entities or by the estuary program itself as one of our sort of convening services to the partners. So it was really more of those sort of activities that that our local partners are interested in and that inform their work, but they're not the actual responsible party for conducting that independent primary research.
Great, thanks Maya for clarifying that. And these are great questions. Keep them coming. If you have any questions, you can throw them into the Q&A window, and you can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask your questions using audio. We have another question about what are the specific ways in which you're able to continue to promote more sustainable water use? For example, the reuse of wastewater or the beneficial use of stormwater. Were you able to adequately connect the water, wastewater, and stormwater agencies? And I think, Bill, your question pertains really to the One Water plan, so I'll direct that to Melissa and Kevin if you'd like to respond.
Sure, Kevin, I might ask you to jump in for some of the technical components and how it's implemented. But yeah, we had members of the stormwater, wastewater, and potable water staff in our working group. We also coordinated with the folks at the various agencies responsible for that. But Kevin, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, our agency developed the policy, but how is Hillsborough County planning on implementing some of this?
So the way we were able to connect the agencies is specifically my division. We have staff that were traditionally, including myself, traditionally members of the water department. And we also have staff that were members of the stormwater department. And our job is to kind of be that bridge between them. Our water and wastewater groups had started. I did mention that when I started in 2004, they were separate. We've slowly started working together, and even changed the way that the infrastructure planning team within the utilities organized. And we historically had 3 teams of planners: potable water planner, wastewater planner, and reclaimed water planning teams. We've actually broken that up and changed it completely, where there are now it's utility lingo, but it's kind of distribution teams, plant teams, and then development services teams. But they all came from those backgrounds. So kind of gotten rid of a lot of the names that led to the siloing, and it's really a cultural change now. It's been pretty good. We're happy about it.
Great, thank you, Kevin. We had another question about the timeline for releasing elements of the comprehensive plan, or the timeline for plan adoption. I think you mentioned that you're at the stage now where you're getting community engagement. What's next, and what does that timeline look like in the immediate future?
Sure. So we have provided the draft language, the draft chapter that's available up on our website today at planhillsborough.org/onewater. We have had workshops and briefings with both our planning commission, which is the board that I work for, that provides a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So we've had a briefing in front of the Planning Commission. We've also had a workshop in front of the Board of County Commissioners. And then actually next month in August, we are going to be going to both of those boards for public hearing. And so this is a Florida specific thing, but the way plan amendments work in Florida is there's a public hearing for transmittal of the plan amendment. The plan amendment, and that is at the end of August. That's by the BOCC. The plan amendment then goes out to various state and local agencies, including some of the ones that I mentioned earlier. They have an opportunity to review, provide comment. If there's an issue, in some cases they can even object. And then we look at the comments, look at the feedback, make any tweaks that are necessary, and then it goes back to the BOCC for final adoption. And that final adoption hearing is scheduled for late October of this year.
Great, thank you, Melissa. These are great questions. We just received another one from Grady. I am grateful for the examples this provides and looking forward to reading the CCMP actions and model comp plan language in detail. I'm curious, are there any aspects of One Water that you think matter but just weren't ultimately able to be translated into a CCMP action? Are there any gaps between the One Water plan and the CCMP actions?
This is Maya Burke again. Our CCMP is not so overly prescriptive. We've found success working with our partners where they're able to sort of pick up what works for them, as long as they're all sort of headed in the same direction towards a healthy Tampa Bay. There's no need for everyone to do everything in exactly the same way. So, I don't really know that it's important to pick out particular gaps, because what I really think requires and ought to be recognized here is this effort to figure out and be really thoughtful and intentional about what worked for Hillsborough County and what policies that they could really direct their resources toward to make sure that they were making the impacts that were beneficial for water resource management. And that fundamentally is the direction and the guidance that the estuary program has sort of shared throughout the region. And so that might not be like a satisfying answer, but that's really, I think, the crux of the success of our approach and why I thought that this One Water amendment deserved to be highlighted and shared throughout the region.
Thank you, Maya. We received a question specifically about the CCMP crosswalk project. Some questions about the process there and how many full-time employees were needed to develop the crosswalk? What is the level of effort? How long did it take to make this project happen? The budget required, and any recommendations for others who may be attempting to do a similar project?
This is Cara. I can attempt to answer that. Some of, well, a lot of the funding came from TBEP through a TBERF grant, and maybe Maya could clarify what the TBERF stands for, but the work was at, yeah,
the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund.
Thank you. So yeah, it was a grant funded project. And then the number of full-time staff, we wouldn't really have a good way of measuring that because there was a lot of turnover that happened between the beginning of the project and the end of the project. But I will say that it did take a significant amount of staff time. And one of the recommendations I would probably say would be good for somebody who's trying to recreate this process in like another region is probably the crosswalk review should be something that's done more collaboratively with the actual jurisdictions instead of having somebody outside of that organization review the fit of the language that's being managed within that organization. So they know their plan the best. So it would definitely be better and more efficient to have them really involved in that actual scoring process.
Great, thank you, Cara. And I'll add there was a lot of effort in the stakeholder meetings to help clarify that, to make sure that our assessment was approved by our local government. So again, echoing what Cara said, making sure that they're involved throughout the process would assist in speeding up the project. And then we also had some help from Mary Helen Duke just mentioned in the chat. We had Pasco County offer a few interns from the University of South Florida who assisted with reviewing the crosswalk. So that also was a level of effort that, you know, wanted to mention. And we have another question. How will this group evaluate progress towards the goals across all the planning jurisdictions? And I think this really pertains to the CCMP. You know, how are we monitoring implementation of these things long term? What are some of the technical resources that are available to help local governments implement these different things after this project concludes?
So this is Maya Burke. This is the measuring and evaluating our progress toward implementing our CCMP is a current priority focus for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. In the past, we've had several high-level marquee goals that we've measured progress towards, and you know, there are things that we're pretty well known for in terms of like seagrass recovery and the acreage amount of seagrass that we've been able to restore in Tampa Bay by protecting water quality. But we know that we can't only report on a couple of high-level indicators, and so we've been working to develop a plan to not only include some self-reporting from our partners, but use some open science tools to more comprehensively monitor, assess, and report on our progress implementing the CCMP. So that's one of the major charges of an estuary program, is to sort of tell the story of recovery and help the partners know where they're at and where they need, to put a little more effort in order to accomplish their shared goals. It's something that we're working on improving, and just to build on something that Melissa mentioned earlier, I'm a big believer in making sure that plans are sort of built in a database format. And then there are some really cool things you can do with open science tools and like R scripting to then translate that information into sort of our more familiar plan formats. But by having them in these searchable structures, they're more easy to review and measure and report on and sort of keep things straight in your head. I don't know how Melissa and Hillsborough County can do it with thousands of these actions. It's hard enough to track hundreds. And so that's one of our charges. It's something that we haven't done as good of a job as we'd like to, and it's part of my job to improve how we do that moving forward.
Thank you, Maya. With that, I do not see any other questions. We have some remaining time. If anyone would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand or throw it into the Q&A box. And if there are no more questions, I would turn it back over to Cara to close us out.
Yeah, I just want to thank our panelists again for joining us this morning and for doing all this hard work to make this webinar happen. And we'll be posting the recording of the webinar on our website, and it'll also be, I believe, on our YouTube channel, but we're going to put something that's very prominent on our homepage so that you can easily find it. But I also have the email addresses of all of you who registered. So I will send something out to registrants directly to let them know where to find the resources from this presentation. And then our email addresses are here. If you have specific questions for any of the panelists and want to reach out to one of us, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.